The British government says it has achieved its goal of 100,000 tests a day by the end of April, more than doubling the number carried out in 2 days. More than 122,000 tests have been carried in the past 24 hours, up from 81,000 the day before.
I knew that it was an audacious goal, but we needed an audacious goal because testing is so important for getting Britain back on her feet. I can announce that we have met our goal. The number of tests yesterday, on the last day of April, was 122,347.
But there are claims the tally has been boosted artificially by including home testing kits sent out by not yet completed or sent to labs for analysis. An increase of 6,000 people has tested positive, bringing the total number of infections to more than 177,000. A further 739 people passed away in the past 24 hours, raising the death toll to more than 27,000. With that, it is time to head to the United Kingdom. British Prime Minister Boris Johnson will begin planning to restart the UK's economy after more than a month of lockdowns. Joining us is Trent Murray, Euronews reporter. Trent, a very good morning to you, or good evening there. Look, this is interesting, the new testing, but there's some question marks as to whether, you know, there's a little bit of fiddling with the numbers.
Yeah, that's right. Matt Hancock, the health minister here, he set that target of 100,000 and it wasn't looking good just a few days ago. They were still well below 50,000, but it seems he's managed to just drag it over the line. He got 122, as you mentioned there in your intro, yesterday being the last day of April. You also mentioned those questions. You're right, the Labor Party here is saying that some of those numbers are being inflated by home testing kits that haven't yet come in. But look, nevertheless, Tim, this is still a monumental achievement given where we were just days ago. We were well behind that target, and I think it's fair to say that most people, even in his own party, had written off his chances of being able to achieve that target. So they were pleased with that result last night here in Westminster, Tim.
A lot of locals think that the UK were behind the eight ball in the whole attacking of the coronavirus, aren't they?
Yeah, well, I mean, the UK now is the second most affected country in Europe. It's just behind Italy. And of course, it had a bit of a head start of Italy. We saw this coming from Italy and Spain a few weeks ahead of it. But that death toll figure, sadly, was boosted this week when some 4,500 deaths in the country's nursing homes were added to the total figure. That's what really sent it skyrocketing. And there had long been concerns here that for elderly residents in nursing homes, they weren't properly being accounted for when they did get sick. It seems now that they are being added to the total, and like we're seeing in other parts of the world, it is the elderly where these clusters are starting to find themselves. Places like retirement homes and nursing homes now are trying to not only step up testing, but as well as try and increase the number of PPE bits of equipment for nurses and other people working there. There were claims there was a big shortage on things like gloves and aprons for those working in the country's care homes.
Well, Boris Johnson, the Prime Minister, is back in Downing Street after going right to the edge with suffering coronavirus himself. The rhetoric has begun about ending lockdown. How tentative are the people? Because the numbers are still very high.
That's right. Boris Johnson gave his first press conference at the Daily Briefing just over 24 hours ago since coming back from hospital and his subsequent recovery. He did say we had passed the peak, but we would only be able to maintain that here if people continued to adhere to social distancing laws and regulations. I think what makes it slightly different here, Tim, is that obviously the UK has got very close proximity to Europe, so we're really able to keep an eye on what's happening with our neighbours. Germany was one of the first countries last week that eased restrictions over here, and just today we've seen the 5th straight day in a row there of infections once again rising. So there are concerns that the disease is starting to rebound in Germany and they may have to reimpose some of those restrictions. So from a British government perspective, they're not wanting to jump the gun quite yet. Boris Johnson said that he can see the light at the end of the tunnel, as can his health officials. But if we do ease those restrictions too early, we could be dragged back into the tunnel for some time to come.
Trent, just going off-piste a little bit, a word that we haven't used a lot of is Brexit. And it's a bit like the US election. It's sort of just been washed away down the river of COVID-19.
Yeah, well, the negotiations are still technically taking place. Obviously, they can't come face-to-face like they were in the past, so those train journeys back and forth between Brussels and London have stopped for those politicians. But they are meeting over Zoom, from what I understand, and other video conferencing, and they are trying to push ahead. Boris Johnson, I mean, he's a big Brexiteer, as is his team. So when he's asked about it, he's determined in saying Britain will leave the EU at the end of this year. But it is very hard to see how that could happen at this stage. I mean, not only does the government here have its hand full trying to deal with the coronavirus, but I mean, European politicians, both from the European Parliament and from their respective countries, I mean, they've had their own woes, of course, with this disease. So the talks are continuing, but again, I think it'll be very difficult to see a situation where at least an extension isn't asked for by one of the sides, because I don't know that they've achieved a lot in the last few months, quite understandably.
Now, amidst all of this, Boris Johnson has become a father again. Now, this is a story that doesn't get written up much, but look, he has a number of children, and he's had a number of partners. His personal life's an interesting one.
Look, it is. His partner, Carrie Simmons, is his partner. He's been with her for a couple of years now. She's a former Conservative Party staffer. He divorced his wife in the last 18 months, and he's been with Carrie Simmons for some time, we understand. Well, they have now had a baby. We got word here in the early hours of Wednesday morning that they gave birth to a healthy baby boy. For Boris Johnson, the birth came just 17 days after he himself had left the hospital after his battle with coronavirus. It's the sixth child for him, as you say, from several partners. We're yet to get a name, but the PM's office does say that Mum and Bub are doing well. The baby does join a very exclusive little club, Tim, of babies born to Prime Ministers, certainly in living memory. It was Leo in 2000, Tony Blair's fourth child that was born, and then 10 years later, Florence to David Cameron. So it'll certainly be an interesting upbringing in the corridors of power for that little one, I suspect, Tim.
Finally, Trent, he came in with a heavy, strong mandate, didn't he, Boris Johnson, after the election? How's his popularity going at the moment? All the drama, the COVID-19, having the baby, everything else.
Yeah, look, by and large, I mean, Boris Johnson's approval rating is quite high, as is the Conservative Party. I mean, all of the surveys pretty well are showing that the British public here do approve of the government's handling of the coronavirus crisis. But there has been a bit of a change at the top in the Labor Party. Of course, Jeremy Corbyn, well, I think it's fair to say, was quite toxic with large parts of the electorate here, and Labor had been low in the polls for years and years and years, and many pollsters say it was his leadership that was causing that. Well, he's now out of the picture. Sir Keir Starmer has taken over, who was his Brexit spokesperson in Corbyn's opposition. And he has come out, and it's been a small rise in the polls in Labor. It's obviously still very early in the innings for him, but that may change the dynamic a little bit. I don't know that that Boris Johnson will have the easy ride that he necessarily did with Jeremy Corbyn in opposition. Sir Keir Starmer has been on the front foot over the past couple of weeks, really trying to hold the government to account on things like those testing numbers we spoke about earlier.
Yeah, a sprinkling of normality coming back. Of course, we'll watch with interest to see what Boris Johnson and his government does with easing of restrictions. There is talk of the Premier League. I think it's confirmed now that they're coming back next month. So a little bit of brighter weather, and let's hopefully think that we're on the up and up in the United Kingdom. Thanks, Trent.